look at some of the yardstick that they used, as mentioned in the press. They talked about the judge must have less judgments thrown out at the Court of Appeal. Then you must have given, or the judge that does not give sentimental judgments. I don't know what that means.
So how do you determine a judge who gives sentimental judgments? And doesn't that actually impede on the independence of the judiciary? You cannot penalize a judge because his case, the judges on appeal have naturally disagreed or necessarily disagreed.
This wasn't chosen by the executive. They said it was leadership in the judiciary that came up with this. They are the ones handling it. So in terms of the independence of the judiciary, does that still come into play?
Well, the point I make is call a spade a spade. If you know you have a problem within the judiciary, then deal with it. You don't need to wait until an administration comes in with an anti-corruption crusade, with the intention to establish special courts, and then you suddenly realize that actually you have some judges that fall short of the mark. You've known that all along anyway. You've known that all along anyway.
Why do you think it's difficult to then wield the big stick? If the NJC has known that all along and, you know, it has oversight functions, what do you think was holding it back?
Lack of political will. Lack of political will. But the way they're going about it is incorrect.
Why would judiciary lack political will? That's where everybody think, oh, no,
that's
it shouldn't be heard
of the
them.
common man, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we go into the issue of the judiciary and why they lack the political will, we'll be here forever. But I am just personally worried about the ability or the risk of them creating what would be seen as an elitist cadre amongst judges, if you start to discriminate.
Yeah, but how about this one where they say, look, you should have delivered, what's that word? A lot more cases. The amount of cases that are thrown out, if we say that yours is maybe on the high side, if they choose you, it means that, look, we may have more cases of this.
Let me give you an example. When I was in the UN, our investigators were graded on the basis of the amount of witness statements that they generated. That's how the workload indicators that was used to apply whether or not they were actually delivering the goods or not. They say, well, if you come back with witness statements. So you know what the investigators used to do? They would go back to the same witness over and over again just to generate witness statements. So we as prosecutors ended up with multiple statements from the same witness, many a time, which were in total contradiction to each other. It's a prosecutor's nightmare. So when you set this sort of benchmarks for judges, and you say, well, I would judge you on the volume of cases that you've, it's not indicative of the quality of such judges in terms of competence. But more importantly, it is not an indicia to actually determine integrity. If what you're trying to ascertain is whether or not I'm above board, how does the number of cases I've churned out over a period of time determine that?
You know, we hit some kind of dead end in some matters in courts. What comes to mind is the prosecutors and investigators.
Yes.
Perhaps let's talk more on that and see how that has helped in our judicial system. Knowing for what we have two main bodies fighting corruption agencies, the ICPC and the EFCC. And when they take any matter to court, who becomes the investigators and who becomes the prosecutor sometimes, and how can these two individuals, if they're not meshed into one, help in driving a case to a conclusion?
Well, it is my personal view that the current structure of both the ICPC and the EFCC is flawed. And the reason why I say that is this. It is very obvious from their structure that they're investigation-based. Their focus is primarily on investigation. That can be seen clearly from Section 2 of the EFCC Act, which requires that the chairman be from the police or from law enforcement. It makes no reference to being a lawyer, let alone being a prosecutor. Now, the problem with that is this. It is the prosecution that bears the burden of proof. It's the prosecution that have to discharge that burden before a court of law. So therefore, you can't have investigators driving prosecutors. It's prosecutors that drive investigations.
So it's the other way around.
It's the other way around. So you need to have the Attorney General's office or the prosecutors that EFCC use directing the investigations as to how to conduct investigations, because they are the ones who know what they need to succeed in court. You cannot have investigators carrying out investigations on their own, on a frolic of their own, come back with a file, and then dump it on a lawyer's lap and say, run with it. It doesn't work that way in reality.
So that accounts for failure in some cases?
In all cases. It has to be, in all cases.
But we also have situations where these policemen happen to be lawyers. In fact, you find many more policemen going on to be lawyers. Does that help any? Does that help at all?
You can be a lawyer one day after law school. That doesn't mean that you have any skill as a lawyer. But having said that, the skills you need as a prosecutor is entirely different from the skills you need as a lawyer. And that's part of the problem we have here. Prosecutors haven't seen themselves as belonging to a unique cadre of our profession. In the US or in England, prosecutors are seen as a very unique branch of our profession, as are judges. Here, it's a means to an end. So just being a lawyer does not make you a prosecutor, let alone a skilled one at that. The time has come where we have to build capacity of lawyers, both in private practice or in the public fora, to be prosecutors. You need the skill to be able to build a criminal case, direct investigations, supervise investigations, build what we call a trial strategy. If you cannot see the end of your case before you start it, then you have no chance of success. You can't just throw the statute book as a defendant and hope that one charge will stick. There is nothing like drafting an indictment with 50 counts, 20 counts, 10 counts. It means you don't know what you're doing. You don't need more than 3 counts in an indictment if you know what you're doing. But the whole idea of drafting 10 counts is hoping that, well, at some stage, 1 count will stick. And you see that. It's like jigsaw.